Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. In today's video, I'm doing a sort of continuation on yesterday's video, which was looking at the possibility of Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez possibly running for the presidential election in 2028. So for today's video, I thought it would be fun to look at the 2024 presidential election results and do a sort of way too early 2028 election prediction between J.D. Vance, the president or vice president-elect of Donald Trump, and AOC, and doing like a quick little prediction of 2028 and how I think it will go. And of course, it doesn't need to be noted that we're obviously way too early on to make any sort of accurate prediction for how I think it will go. So this is merely just looking at the 2024 election results and just my own interpretation, since there's really no other factors or polling data to go off of. So right now, just purely at the lowest floors, I think AOC starts off with 120 electoral votes. J.D. Vance starts off with 124. And there are some other states on here that I think either are safe states or very borderline safe states, but I did want to address them first before moving forward. Starting first with the state of Texas and its 40 electoral votes. Texas voted for Donald Trump 56-42 in the 2024 presidential election. This is a state that really swung far, far to the right than initially was expected on election day, and Trump at 14% win over Kamala Harris. I think it's a good enough indicator for me to put Texas into the safe Vance Republican column. Next, we're going to look at this district right here. This is Nebraska 1, Nebraska's 1st district. Nebraska 1 voted for Donald Trump by about 13%, 56% to Harris's 43%. And this is one where I think you could make the argument between making it a safe district or a likely district for Vance in 2028. However, I do think I am going to put it in the safe district at this time. So that puts Vance at 165. AOC is at 120. Now I want to look at the state of New York and its 28 electoral votes. New York is fascinating because it swung a lot to Donald Trump in 2024, where Kamala Harris won the state 56% to 44%, a 12% margin of victory for Harris over Trump. The only difference here between this being a likely Democratic state instead of a safe Democratic state is I think the fact that Donald Trump was from New York was enough actually to maybe get some pull in the state, where I'm not sure J.D. Vance will be able to form as well as Trump did in the state of New York in 2028. I think 2028 could be a case of, if it is Vance versus someone like AOC, we're going to see the red areas potentially get redder and the blue areas get bluer. And then they'll become the swing states. That'll be the real question. But I think as for the state of New York's case, I'm really hesitant about putting it in safe or likely, but I think for now it does stay in the safe Democratic column. So that's New York. I put New York at 148 for AOC, Vance at 165. Now as we move on, we're getting more and more into the competitive states in this election. First, we're going to look at the state of New Jersey, because this is one that I'm sure many, including myself, are very fascinated about. Kamala Harris won the state 52% to 46%, a 6% margin of victory. This is one that was definitely a surprise and very, very close. And at 6%, clearly it's closer to being a likely Democratic state than being a safe Democratic state at this time. And with that in mind, I'm not sure how much Republicans will be able to make gains in New Jersey. The 2025 governor elections could be an indicator if Republicans are able to make any inroads in the state. But for now, I feel pretty confident in a Vance versus AOC matchup, putting the state of New Jersey into the likely Democratic column, probably going up from Trump's 2024 numbers by about 1 or 2%, but definitely moving New Jersey away from being a safe Democratic state into a likely Democratic state. And in a similar mold, I am now going to look at the state of Illinois and its 19 electoral votes. Illinois, Donald Trump was able to win this state 55%, Kamala Harris won the state over Donald Trump 55% to 44%, an 11% margin of error. And I think this is a state where if Vance were to replicate this and lose to AOC by 11 points in Illinois by the criteria, that still would be enough to make it a likely Democratic state. And I think it's possible AOC wins here by about 13%, which for me would put the state of Illinois not a safe state, but rather a likely Democratic state, something that I'm sure many were not expecting for 2024. AOC is at 181, Vance is at 165. Now we have the state of Florida. Florida, ended up voting for Donald Trump by 13%, 56% to 43%. This is a state that is extremely borderline between being a safe Republican state and likely Republican state. And that's how I had it going into 2024, and then Trump won the state by 13 points. At this point, I have not really have any other doubts about this. I am very confident putting Florida into the safe Republican column. For the state of Iowa and its 6 electoral votes, this is a similar situation. This is a state that I thought was borderline a safe to likely Republican state. Trump won at 56% to 43%, and I think in a Vance versus AOC matchup, I think we're going to see Iowa continue to get red as well. That puts Iowa into the safe Republican column. Vance is now at 201. AOC is at 181. However, I do still think AOC would be able to hold some previously swing state areas, starting with Colorado and its 10 electoral votes. On election night, Kamala Harris won the state of Colorado 54% to 43%, an 11% victory over Donald Trump. And I do think that if AOC runs similar to this would be in the Democratic column, which means she could even improve on this margin, but it would still be about a likely Democratic margin. So for right now, for Vance versus AOC, I would put Colorado in the likely Democratic column. Now we're starting to get into the more competitive states on the election itself. And this is where some of the findings have been very, very interesting going into 2028. I'm first going to start up in the Northeast with the state of Maine and its situation. Maine's first congressional district voted by about 22% for Harris over Trump. That's going to be a safe district, no doubt. Maine's second district, though, voted for Donald Trump by about 9%. And at 9%, that would be enough to put it in the likely Republican column. So Maine's second district actually didn't really change too much compared to a lot of other states in the country. It didn't really become more Republican or more Democrat. It remained pretty much what it was in 2020. So Maine's second district, I would probably put in the likely Vance column. Maine at large ended up voting for Harris over Trump by about 7%. That would be more of a likely Democratic state. And I think that's actually where it's going to remain for 2028. So I think Maine at large will continue to be a Democratic state, but a likely Democratic state, whereas the second district of Maine will be a likely Republican district. So in terms of the composition from 2024, how it voted, I think in 2028 it's likely going to replicate that once again. That puts Vance at 202, AOC at 193. The state of Ohio and its 17 electoral votes, obviously the home state of J.D. Vance, this is one that voted for Donald Trump 55% to 44%, an 11% victory for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris. This is certainly one that it is going to be borderline safe to likely, depending on how this goes for 2028. The margin of safe is 15%. Trump won it by 11. Is Vance going to be able to gain 4% more and win it by over 15%? It's really, really tight, and I know Vance is from Ohio, but I still think right now it goes into the likely Republican column just because I can't see Vance getting over a 15% margin of victory in Ohio. It's certainly possible, but I just don't think right now it's the most likely thing to happen. So I'm, by the thinnest of margins, putting Ohio into the likely Republican column, but boy, that's really a close one. That's borderline to being safe. Vance is now at 219, AOC is at 193. Now we're going to look at the state of Virginia and its 13 electoral votes. This is a state where Kamala Harris defeated Donald Trump here 52% to 47%, just a 5% win for Harris over Trump. Certainly much, much closer than what it was in 2020, and even closer than what it was in 2016. This is going to be a very fascinating state to watch as for the governor's race in 2025 to see how Virginia is going. If it is possible that the Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, and what's supposed to be a Democratic tilted election, if Sears can pull off an upset victory and win here, that could be a sign that maybe Virginia is trending in a more Republican direction. But given Harris has 52, Trump has 47, and Vance being Trump's VP, I do think AOC would nearly be able to hold on to Virginia. And I think at that 5% threshold, that would just be enough to put it barely in the likely Democratic column. Not by a lot, but just enough. Probably about 5% on the dot. You could make the argument for lean, but I think it would probably go just about likely Democratic. AOC is at 206, Vance is at 219. Now we come to the state of New Mexico. New Mexico is a very fascinating state where it voted for Kamala Harris 52% to 46%. This is a state that Trump, I think, did an appearance or two, but didn't really put a ton of effort into, but it was still a 6% margin of victory state. So New Mexico, I don't think is going to be a state in 2028 that's going to be as not looked over, but not looked at at all. And I think at about a 6% margin of victory for Harris over Trump, I think translated to 28 of being about a likely Democratic state, but very close to being a lean Democratic state, similar to Virginia. You can really make the argument Virginia and New Mexico at this point are closer to being lean Democrat than safe Democrat. So that's very, very interesting to watch there. AOC is at 211, Vance is at 219. While I'm over here, I'm also going to look at Nebraska's 2nd District, Nebraska 2, where Nebraska 2 voted 52% for Harris, 47% for Donald Trump. That is a 5% number. I don't think AOC would really go too much far down in a matchup versus Vance than Harris did against Trump. I think this would probably put Nebraska's 2nd District around a likely Democratic margin. 212 for AOC, 219 for J.D. Vance. And this is where things really start to get interesting in the election. The states of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and New Hampshire are where I think things are really going to start getting very, very close for the 2028 election. And this is actually very fascinating to me because going into 2024, I didn't really have Minnesota and New Hampshire on the radar as being very close competitive states. And yet, we saw that, starting with New Hampshire, Kamala Harris won the state over Donald Trump by just 3% of the vote. So from now on, until I see something that shows otherwise, I'm going to put New Hampshire in the toss-up column because so far it shows in 2024 that it was a 3% margin of victory in a state that everyone thought by Biden winning it by almost 10 points or over 10 points in 2020 was no longer a swing state. New Hampshire approved in 2024. Maybe not so. Might still be a swing state, 51% to 48%. For 2028, I think AOC would still hold on to the state of New Hampshire, but I think in a lean Democratic column, no longer in a safe or likely Democratic column. New Hampshire, definitely a toss-up. But I do think AOC would narrowly hold on and win there. Now looking at the state of Minnesota and its 10 electoral votes, sort of a similar situation. This is when Harris defeated Trump in by 51% to 47%. Again, a state that's looking like it might not necessarily be the likely or safe Democratic state that it once was. At 4% margin of victory, I feel pretty confident of putting Minnesota into the lean Democratic column for the 2028 election of AOC versus J.D. Vance. So right now, nothing has changed so far from the 2024 election. AOC is at 226, Vance is at 219. Where do things go for here? Well, a lot of these are going to be ratings changes, starting with the state of North Carolina. North Carolina, we saw the polls were incredibly tight, and some of them even showing Harris leading over Trump for a time. Trump ended up winning here by about 3%. And this is honestly pretty typical, where North Carolina, for some reason, the presidential level, either especially Donald Trump, always seems to outperform the polls on election day and win the state. In 2020, it was by about a little under 1.5%. In 2024, it was by about 3%. So I think going into 2028, I don't think this trend is going to really slow down. I think J.D. Vance starts off with North Carolina in the lean Republican column. Now we go to the state of Georgia and its 16 electoral votes. This is a state that was a flip from 2020. Donald Trump won it over Kamala Harris 51% to 49%. This is a very interesting one in Georgia because in Georgia itself, when you look at the state itself did trend to the right, but the Atlanta metro area did trend to the Democratic side. So the problem for Republicans in Georgia has not necessarily gone away, which is the state did trend to the right, but the Atlanta area is only going to get more and more blue. But for right now, Trump was able to win the state back, potentially maybe proving 2020 was just a very good year for Joe Biden and it won't be going blue again. I'm not there yet. I wouldn't say that yet. I think Georgia will still continue to be very close. But for J.D. Vance versus AOC, I think it would start off as a lean Republican state. That puts Vance at 251, AOC at 226. Now we're getting into the familiar suspects, really, of what the 2024 election came down to, starting with Arizona and its 11 electoral votes. Arizona, a very, very close race that nearly went to Joe Biden in 2020. Donald Trump won at 52% to 47%, a 5% win. This is one where the margins of this win were pretty much borderline between being a lean state and a likely state of Trump versus Harris. And this is going to be a very fascinating one to watch for in 2028 because you can make the argument based on the migration into Maricopa County, Arizona should be either close to a Democratic state or definitely a toss-up state where it has 2 Democratic senators and a Democratic governor right now. So it'll be very fascinating to watch in Arizona. But at the presidential level, Trump won here by 5% on the border between being likely and lean. I am going to have Arizona start off as a lean for JD Vance. I think that's more of a cautious one. I could easily give it as likely for Vance, but I'm putting it as lean because I want to see some more developments come out of Arizona before making the jump and making it a likely Republican state. So Vance is at 262, AOC is at 226. The state of Nevada, after several elections of it getting very, very close, it did finally happen where Donald Trump won the state 51% to 47% at the presidential level. The polls in the past few elections have been very close, but they usually broke for the Democrat on election day. This time around, the polls were very close, but Donald Trump held the lead and continued to hold that lead on election night, even exceeding his lead at 51% to 47%. Looking at Nevada specifically, Las Vegas, where Clark County is, Donald Trump came very close to winning this county, 50 to 48%, while Trump ran up the numbers throughout all the rural counties in the state, and just narrowly trailing and losing Washoe County by 1%. This is the exact roadmap set by Donald Trump for how a Republican could win statewide in Nevada, and Trump was able to do that at 51-47. So with that, I think the state of Nevada, yes, it's going to be a toss-up state, no doubt, in 2028, but a 4-point win out of Nevada, I think, has to start it off at least in the lean Republican column for JD Vance. You can make the argument for tilt Republican, but I think right now starts off as a lean Republican state. Vance is at 268, AOC starts off at 226. Now we're into the 3 Rust Belt states, where this is a very fascinating situation. Starting with the state of Pennsylvania, Donald Trump won here 50.4% to 48.7%. This is one where this race was very, very close, but Donald Trump won the state by, honestly, a little bit more than I thought he would. He won the state by about 1.7% or so. Trump won statewide in Pennsylvania. Very, very close, 1.7%. Not enough for me to feel really confident about putting it in a lean Republican margin or anything like that yet. So I do think it's going to be very tight in 2028. But I do think for sure Vance starts out as the favorite to win Pennsylvania, but I would still put it in the tilt Republican column for now. I'm very fascinated to see in the next few elections, like in the 2026 midterms, how Pennsylvania votes. If it does vote even more to the right than it did in 2024, that could be an indicator that maybe Pennsylvania should be moved up to a lean Republican. But for now, I don't think it's on the same level as a Arizona or Nevada or North Carolina in terms of rating. But I do think Vance starts out as the favorite in Pennsylvania at 287, adding its 19 electoral votes. The state of Michigan and its 15 electoral votes, Donald Trump won here by about 1.4%. Typically, the state is described as the most Democratic of the 3 Rust Belt states, but it has been won by Donald Trump in 2024 by 1.4%. And with that, I do think it would be enough to start off with JD Vance as a very narrow winner in Michigan in the tilt margin. Lastly, we have the state of Wisconsin and its 10 electoral votes. Wisconsin was actually the most Democratic-friendly of these 3 Rust Belt states, going for Donald Trump by 0.9%. This one is the only one under 1% of the vote, but still very interesting. Trump was able to win here. 2024 also continued the streak of all 3 Rust Belt states voting in unison. And honestly, going forward, until I see anything that suggests otherwise, I am going to say all 3 of these states in 2028, I do think will vote in unison once again, starting with JD Vance off by winning Wisconsin, getting him up to 312 electoral votes. And again, maybe my opinion will change come the 2028 election 4 years from now. Certainly a long ways away, but until I see something that proves otherwise, I'm going to continue with the trend of these 3 states voting the same. So right now, based on the 2024 election results, JD Vance and AOC would be at 312 for JD Vance, AOC 226. With some very, very close states, looking at Minnesota and New Hampshire on the Democratic side, and potentially, maybe Republicans are looking to make potential gains in states like Virginia, New Jersey, and New Mexico, hoping maybe to see something in 2026 that could suggest those states as potential swing states. But this is where I think things start off in a matchup of Vance versus AOC. Let me know what you think about this video by liking the video and leaving a comment below what you thought about it. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button. And make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.